Hi everybody, welcome to Adobe Live on Behance.net. My name's Michael Jarrett. I'm here with Jesús Ramirez. Joining us for day 3, this is Photoshop week. We've learned some amazing things so far. Jesús is a master at Photoshop. Earlier we had Nathaniel Dodson, that was his final stream this week. And following us shortly after is Shauna Lynn. So again, welcome to day 3. We've been learning all about Photoshop fundamentals of compositing. It's more of a beginner-focused thing, so if you don't really know a lot about compositing, today maybe a little bit of 3D in Photoshop, it's a good time to join us because I don't know, we're gonna see a lot of cool work, I know that. We've seen it this week. And welcome, let us know where you're from in the chat. We've got a couple of cool things going on today. We'll be doing a chat and win in 30 minutes, and that's a good chance to win some free stickers, which is an awesome prize. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that in 30 minutes. And then an hour and a half from now, we're going to review portfolios. So we encourage you to submit your portfolio just to the right of the chat tab. You can find details on how to do that. And we're really encouraging you to submit a portfolio if you use a lot of Photoshop, if you do a lot of compositing, or maybe even a little bit of 3D, since we'll focus on some of that today. So we'll select 2 people at an hour and a half in. We'll take a look at that on air. It's a good time to get some feedback, get a little bit of exposure, and just generally celebrate your amazing work. So, welcome back. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
Yeah. I'm digging this shirt here.
Yeah. This is an Adobe stock shirt. So, thank you guys.
Yeah.
I don't know who gave this to me.
I don't either, but it's an awesome shirt.
It's a fantastic shirt.
So for those of the audience that don't know you want to kind of describe who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Jesús Ramirez. I've been a professional graphic artist for about 15 years, but roughly in the last 5 years, I've been focusing a lot more on training. Most notably, I run the Photoshop training channel on YouTube, which is a really popular Photoshop YouTube channel where I teach people how to use Photoshop. Simple as that. And
yeah.
I've been lucky enough that I got into present here, I don't know, 5-6 times now.
Yeah.
All the conferences that Adobe does, Max, Summit, Make It in Sydney, Australia, a whole bunch.
Yeah, and you're posting videos at least once a week,
At least once a week on my YouTube channel, yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody likes what they see here, I know I've already learned so much from you this week.
Oh, please.
Yeah, seriously, and I work here. So Photoshop Training Channel is a really good channel to check out. Thank you, Tim, for putting the link in the chat pod. Go check that out, subscribe. Find him on Behance. What are we doing today? You want to share some work?
Sure. We'll start with just a little work just so people get an idea of some of the things that you can do with what I'm going to show today. Obviously, some of the work here may seem a little more complicated than what we're going to tackle today, but like I've mentioned in the past 2 days, all the fundamentals are important, and from there you can just build on top of that just using those same fundamentals that we're going to learn.
Right, cool.
So here we are on my Behance page. If you want to follow me on it, I'm at JR from PTC. And there's 2 things I want to show you really quickly. This is a 3D model composited in Photoshop into an Adobe stock background. So that is basically what we're going to be doing today. We're not going to use a zombie, but we're going to create a 3D model and place it on a background inside of Photoshop. And a lot of those compositing principles that we learned on day 1 still apply when using 3D. So if I talk about something that you may not be familiar with, like perspective, I'm not going to go too deep into it since we spent a lot of time in day 1. You can watch the replay.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about where we talked about perspective and things like that. But yeah, this is just a 3D model. And I also want to show you guys something that I created in Adobe Dimension, which is a 3D compositing app that Adobe has. It's a great app. Some of you may know it as Project Felix, which was the beta name. I think Dimension officially came out, what was it, this over a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Max 2017, I believe
Yeah.
it was. Yeah, but this is a 3D rendered created using Adobe Dimension. You can see this little animation here, how it looks inside of the application. And I made all these different renders. Each render took about 8 or so hours to render.
And are all of these built from scratch? Are some of them pre-built models? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, good question, Michael. So all of these models are Adobe stock models. Mm-hmm. And if you go into the Adobe stock, and just so you guys know, if you go into stock.adobe.com, this is Adobe Stock, where you can get a whole bunch of assets for all your projects. And one of the categories is 3D. You can click on 3D, and you can download models, lights, and materials. I, of course, to answer your question, I use models that I found on here. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but you can find them here.
Incredible.
And the editing that I did with the models, though, is change texture. And I know that if you're new to 3D, you may not know what that means, but it's basically, you can think of it as a wallpaper around an object that gives the object the look. So, for example, that's a Spider-Man that I think I talked about yesterday that I created is right on that laptop. It's just the texture that I applied on that laptop to make it seem as if, Photoshop was running with that.
Right.
With that art piece. And then these are all logos for a whole bunch of my friends. So I decided my real laptop, as you can see, has no stickers.
Mine has no stickers.
Yeah, he
also.
has no stickers.
No
Yeah,
stickers
yeah. So I figured, hey, all my friends always give me stickers, and then I put them on my laptop, so I'll just do it digitally.
Yeah.
So I actually, for some of these, I took pictures of the actual stickers. For others, I just found their logos online. And same thing for the books. I use my friend's books. So every book in here is from people that I know, and these are actual real books. And I just, what I literally did is with my cell phone, I took a photo of the cover of the book, and I just used that as a texture and laid it on top of the 3D model of a book, and then scale the books in different dimensions so that they would sort of match the actual size of the books in real life.
Oh, I see Colin right there.
Yeah, this is Colin Smith, Bertman Roy, Von Glishka, another book by Bertman Roy, my friend Clady. She wrote Plant Therapy. You can barely see it, but this is Roberto Valenzuela, who actually, for those of you who were watching the stream yesterday, I don't know how many of you caught it, but my phone started ringing. I was like, oh my God, I forgot to turn off my phone, but it was vibrating. So I kind of did this and turned it off. That was my friend Roberto calling me, who wrote the book, Picture Perfect Lighting. But anyway. So all those principles we're going to talk about today. Oh, and by the way, if you're interested in finding out exactly which 3D model I use and for what, I labeled it on there. So you can just click on the link and see the 3D model.
I think that's something I appreciate so much about your Behance projects. It's not just the final work that's there. There's also tons of process, either videos or breakdowns, listing sources, or listing like how many layers you had, how long it took you, where the sources came from.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for people learning because, when we're doing a portfolio review, sometimes we don't even know like what was composited in, because sometimes it just looks like a photo, which is a good thing, right? Yeah. But we don't know what came in from where, and it just helps people understand better how it was put together, and it just helps everybody learn, I think. And since I said it before, the last 5 years I've been focusing so much on learning that's also on the back of my head, giving people the resources so they could, kind of figure it out. Since I don't really have a tutorial for this, at least they can see the pieces individually.
Sometimes that's enough.
And sometimes that's enough. That's right. So yeah. Oh, and by the way, I do have like a full 1 hour free crash course on Adobe Dimension. If you're interested, we're going to talk about it here today, but I'm definitely not going to go in as deep as I do in that video. So you can check out my Behance page and then watch that video on like a full 1 hour course on Dimension.
Cool.
It's free on YouTube. So yeah, so that's what we're gonna do today. Just talk about 3D. But before we get into 3D, there's one other thing I wanted to show with 2D that I think is really cool, and in some ways, the project that we're gonna work on is a little timely, and you'll see why in a moment.
Cool.
So let me just bring up Photoshop, and I'm going to open up my Day 3 folder here, and we're gonna work with this file here, and I'll show you the final one first. So this is a composite, and for those of you that watched the movie Avengers, you'll kind of see where the inspiration came from. It's a dispersion effect. And it was actually created really easily by using Adobe stock images and then taking those Adobe stock images and converting them into brushes. So that's another reason why I really like using Adobe stock, because I can easily think of something that I need, download it, and then use it as a brush, as a pattern, as something else, not necessarily just a photo.
Right.
So I used an Adobe stock image to create this dispersion effect, and I'm going to show you how I did it in this next example. And by the way, you don't necessarily need to use Adobe stock. You can go out and take your own photos if you like. That, for me, just takes a little more time, and I'd rather just download it quickly and just get going with actually working in Photoshop. But you're welcome to take your own photos if you like.
And And just as a note for everybody, if at any point during the stream something, triggers a question in your mind, or you have a curiosity about something that you've seen, or maybe a question that you can answer that's related to what we're taking a look at, please let us know in the chat. I'll kind of collect them, and every once in a while we'll take a minute to stop and answer your questions for you. Yeah. If we can answer them.
Yeah,
but so far you've been able to answer all of them, so try and challenge him.
See, now I'm not going to be able to answer anything. People are really going to throw their hard questions at me. So let me open up the starter file. And I have just the background of an alley. We have our model. And we have this photo that I found of on Adobe stock of just charcoal. That's all it is. Somebody, crumbled up some charcoal on top of a white piece of paper, took a photo of it, and that's the Adobe stock asset. And we're going to use that to create a brush and then create that effect that you saw in the example. And also I have other overlays. We spoke about it on Monday, I think or Tuesday, excuse me, with the snow. How I just like downloading overlays and just using blending modes that we learned about yesterday to blend it into images. So we're going to use that as well to create those sparks that you saw in the effect. So first things first, we're going to extract the model from the background, and as you've been seeing in the last 2 days, we're going to use the quick selection tool. In older versions of Photoshop, you do have to click and drag to select the model. But in Photoshop CC 2019, if you're a member of the Creative Cloud, you have access to the Select Subject button, which is artificial intelligence, Adobe Sensei, that looks at the image and tries to figure out what the main subject is, and it selects it for you really, really easy. On an easy background like this one with a white background, it's going to do a really good job.
Simple, yeah.
And you can just click on the layer mask icon to mask him, and it does a really, really good job. Since this is going to be a dispersion effect, we're gonna make it seem as he's disintegrating. So we don't really need to worry about having a perfect edge, because we don't want perfect edges for this in this example. So I'm just not gonna worry about it. If I need it, I can go in there and refine it later, but we'll leave it like so for now. And I do want to mention one quick thing. A lot of times when I do tutorials on YouTube and I use images like this, one of the comments that people always have is, well, you're using a perfect photo. The background is white. Like, why don't you do it with a harder background? And my answer to that always is, I've never seen a After Effects tutorial, a Premiere tutorial, where they tell the person to use not to use a green screen. Yeah, just go and video shoot something and then keyframe every single frame to adjust the mask. The reason that professional photographers, compositors, and most professionals use a flat background is because it is easier.
Right.
So we want to save some time. Just like now, we have a green screen behind us.
Right. So whether you're actually taking the photo to be used later, or whether you're searching for a photo to use, why not just make something that already is meant for this purpose?
Yes. And I do understand there's situations where you do have to work with what you have.
Sure.
But then that just entails more work and more hacks and more.
And you could do it anyway.
And you can do it anyway.
If you had to, you'd do it, but why not?
So that's my advice for you guys. Always try to take the photos, because I remember when I first started learning Photoshop, I didn't even have a camera. I used to rent it from my university, and I used to live near an IKEA, which is a store that sells furniture, and usually their walls are blue.
Yeah.
So I would go and take my friends over to stand in front of that blue wall, take pictures, and then drive them back home. But you do what you can.
Yeah, creative thinking.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was my little spiel on always try to make your life easy. Just have solid backgrounds. Yeah. Okay. So now that we have the layer masked, I'm going to right click and select convert to smart object, so we can work with this layer non-destructively. And that just simply means you can always come back and edit it. And I know I sound like a broken record. I've mentioned that so many times during the stream, but it's really important.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to work with this charcoal layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable all the other layers, like so. And in Photoshop, you can take an image and turn that into a brush. And what that means is the white pixels are going to become transparent, or bright pixels are going to become white pixels become transparent, and then there's different levels of opacity after that. So essentially, the background is going to disappear, and then the remaining pixels are going to become part of the brush. And all you really need to do is go into Edit, Define Brush Preset, and you can see the little preview there. See that? How it already looks like a splatter brush, which is what I want. And the name really doesn't matter. I'm just gonna press OK. And Photoshop immediately selects the newly created brush and I can start painting with it. So let me just create a solid color background, white, and I'll create a new layer and I can paint.
Wow.
Just like that.
Yeah.
But you can use the left and right bracket keys on the keyboard to reduce the size of the brush. But when I paint, that really doesn't look that good. So I want to be able to paint distortions out of my character, but this brush is just not going to do the job. Luckily with Photoshop, we can edit brushes really easily. So I'm going to click on this icon here to bring up the brush settings, and I can start adjusting the brush. I like to start with shape dynamics, and I can adjust the size jitter, which means that each of these brush strokes is going to be a different size. See, when I click, it just changes the size automatically. So that's what size jitter does. It just changes the size of each brush stroke, so then we can make it seem more random.
And jitter is kind of a way of saying variation.
Variation,
Yeah.
yes, thank you for that, yeah. So it's just variation. But still, it's looking much better, but it's still not looking the way that I would want it to look. So I'm gonna change the angle jitter, so now we're varying the angle of the brush. And notice how that's looking much, much better. See that?
Yep.
And we can also adjust the scattering to make it scatter a little bit, like that. So that's already looking much more like the dispersion effect that I want. And by the way, I'm using a mouse right now, but usually at home I have my Wacom tablet and I could just use the pressure sensitivity to control all these. And you can see the drop downs here. For example, for size jitter, I could use pen pressure if I had it. So you can use that as well. I'm also going to go into the brush tip and I'm just going to increase the spacing. Also notice the preview window here at the bottom. It gives you a preview of what that would look like. So that's looking way, way better. So that's what I want to do. See that? So I'm just going to delete that brush now, or that layer, excuse me. Collapse the panel. And I don't really need this charcoal layer, but I'll keep it in here just in case. I don't need this color fill layer, so I'll delete that. And I'm just going to work with our, our model now. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer, and this is all, you know, subjective. So you can just start painting away with black to kind of make it seem as if he's disappearing. See that?
Yeah.
And this is why I was saying you don't really need to have perfect edges in this case, because we don't want perfect edges.
I wonder if we can kind of zoom in on that too.
Yeah, sure. See that? And obviously I'm going fairly quickly here. And in a real project, I would spend a lot more time making sure that I don't go too deep and just making things disappear.
And while it may look like it, this is not a destructive edit.
It's not a
It's like
destructive
a
edit.
weird layered pun. It's not very funny. This is a non-destructive edit, even though it looks a little like
Yeah.
we're destroying a human figure.
It's all there. It's all there. Yeah, you guys are getting good jokes today too.
Yeah, if anybody has brush-related, 3D-related puns, we love to hear them.
Yesterday we had a couple good ones.
Yeah, for blending modes, which is, you got to be pretty creative.
Yeah.
The winner gets a round of applause.
Maybe two.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm not going to spend too much time just, you know, going through the entire image, but you guys get the idea, right? So then the next thing is to actually create the particles that are disappearing from his body. So for that, I would create a new layer, and I would just select the eyedropper tool and select the color found in his shirt. But I'll disable the layer mask by holding Shift and clicking on the layer. You can notice the red X that covers it. With the eyedropper tool selected, I can select, you know, the color of his shirt. And then I can start painting with the same exact brush. I can start painting away, or actually painting in the particles that are disappearing from his body. And all I would do is just hold Alt Option in the Mac. With the brush tool selected, if you hold Alt and Option, you get the eyedropper tool. When you release, you go back into the brush tool. So I can select, I'm just gonna do it like this. I'm just gonna select the color here because I want the same color from the shirt. Oh wow, that was way too big.
So a couple questions maybe
Yeah.
you can answer while you
Sure,
work.
sure.
Somebody's asking if there's a reason you have this brush smoothing set to 100%, or maybe even if you could just speak to what that means and why you would choose one, or you know, what value.
Yeah, so there's no real reason. So you can see the overlay when I paint. So when you have your your brush set the smoothing to 100, it just helps you create a much smoother brush stroke. You can kind of see how it's dragging. See how I'm dragging the brush? There's that little pink line behind the brush stroke. It's almost like thinking like you're dragging something. So like if I had like a cable tied to something and I pull it, I'm gonna create a much more smoother brush than if I set it to 0 and then I just paint. So now it's not really following. It's not really, that imaginary cable is not pulling on it.
Yeah, it's just straight coming from your hand, which can be kind of wobbly or rigid even.
Yeah, so there's no real reason. I mean, that was the setting that I had it to begin with, and in this case, I just feel that it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Yep, but good question, and good eye too. Anyway, so and what I would do in this case is just get different shades of the red. And that was way too much. You completely blew up in that case. Yeah, we'll leave that one. That one's fine. But anyway, as I said, this is all very subjective, and you do need to spend a lot of time fine-tuning it. And notice how I'm just selecting different colors and making them disappear. Once I hold the Shift key and click on the layer mask, you can kind of see the effect. And obviously, you can adjust opacity. You can create more layers, and you can do all that fun stuff. I'm just gonna keep painting just a little more on this side just to make it look a little better. It's not looking as good as I would want it to look, but again, we don't want to spend too much time fine-tuning. And as I've said before in the streams yesterday and the day before, what really makes the difference between like an amateur-looking composite and a professional composite is just the amount of fine-tuning that you do after you have your initial composite.
Right. Yeah, it's about kind of achieving a quick look first to see if it's even, I don't know, believable or the layout's correct, and then suddenly your refinements become smaller and more minute and more minute, and suddenly...
Like, I think that in most of my professional composites that I do for a client, I probably spend more time on the actual fine-tuning than, just setting it up and getting it, getting it 80% of the way there is faster than the last 20%. Yeah. So we'll just say that this is good. So these are the particles, and obviously the model's there, layer mask. So really quickly we're able to achieve somewhat believable effect. And another thing that you can do just to show you guys is you could duplicate the layer. And I'm just going to delete the layer mask, and I'm going to rasterize it, which means that it will no longer be a smart object. Now these are pixels that I'm going to destroy. You can go into Filter, Liquify, and I'm just going to increase the size of the brush, and I'm just going to do that. Something like that. You can use a combination of both techniques. So we'll just say...
Nice and surrealist.
Yeah, now he looks like a strong, like a superhero. He looks strong. So I'm just gonna hold Alt Option in the Mac and click on the layer mask icon to create a black layer mask, which means that hides everything on the layer. So Alt, clicking on the layer mask icon gives you a black layer mask. Then with the brush tool, I can paint with white to reveal those pixels, but now it still looks like this integration effect, but now you get the texture of his shirt. See that?
Yeah.
And you get, his skin color. So in some ways it could look more realistic. See that? So use a combination of both, I would say. I think that gives you the best results, especially if I zoom in into this area. You can see now how there's some detail of the shirt and then just actual particles that are just completely disintegrated, and I think it just looks much better.
Yeah.
So you can use a combination of both techniques. And I want to show you one other thing, and this sort of relates to what we talked about yesterday, using blending modes to quickly apply an overlay to an image. So I have this layer here, which I found simply by going into my libraries panel and searching on the search bar where it says here, you can click on this down pointing arrow, Adobe Stock, and you can just type in something like, particle overlay.
And this is actually searching Adobe Stock as if you were going to the website.
Yes.
And, assuming you have an internet connection, you can actually search the entire stock library from within Photoshop.
Exactly.
Really cool.
Exactly. So even though I'm going to use the one that that I have here. I'm just gonna pick out another one just to show you guys the process. So, you know what? This one may work. This one might be kind of cool. So I can just click and drag it into my composite. And if I need to, I can scale it. I'll accept the changes. Notice that there's a watermark. But if I decide that this is the actual layer that I want to work with, then I can simply license it by right-clicking and selecting License Image. The window's going to come up and it's going to tell me how many licenses I have and if I want to use it. So currently I have 68. Do I want to use one? Sure, I'll use it. I want to use it for this project. I'll press OK. The image will be licensed, which means that the Creative Cloud, and you can see the spinning arrow here, is going to download the high-res image to your Creative Cloud, and that's going to update on that little smart object. You see that little cloud icon? That's telling you that that layer is linked to the cloud. So when it updates and it downloads, the watermark will be removed, and that could take maybe a couple more seconds.
Yeah, depending on the speed of the internet connection. The cool thing is when we just saw it become licensed and now the high res is in place is even if you, adjusted the layer in some way, you transformed it, maybe you apply layer styles or add a mask to it or any number of things and you choose license, it just replaces that preview image, the low res preview image with a high res, and all your changes are still in
Exactly.
place.
And talking about changes, because people always tell me, well, can you do this type of change or that type of change? The easiest way I can tell people to know is if this layer thumbnail still has a little cloud icon, then yes. And if it's telling you to rasterize it, which means that little icon would disappear, then no.
You're right.
So simple as that.
Non-destructive.
Yeah, non-destructive. But anyway, so that was the same process that I used for this image. I licensed it. I knew that it was going to work. So there it is. And the reason that I don't usually like to demo these things, like when I'm in a live presentation, is because sometimes there might be issues with internet and things like that, and I don't want to be stuck without having the asset.
Right. Yeah.
But I still wanted to go through the process to show you guys. Anyway, so as we discussed yesterday, we have blending modes. These blending modes are all in categories. You can see the little lines that divide them. We want to use the blending modes in this category, in the lighten category, because we want to hide the dark pixels and keep the bright ones. So you can just scroll down the list and see which one looks better. I think I'll use screen, and I'm going to use 2 adjustment layers. Actually, in this case, I don't need to use an adjustment layer because it's a smart object, so we can still work non-destructively by going into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and I'm just going to make the darker pixels darker and the brighter pixels brighter, and you can think of this middle point as contrast. And you can sort of already see those particles there. They look much, much better. And I'm also gonna go into Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. I'm gonna adjust the saturation of those particles. Click on Colorize and just try to make them, seem hot.
Yeah.
Like so. And as we've been watching in the last 2 or 3 days we've been doing this, one of my last steps is always selecting the top layer, holding Shift, selecting the bottom layer, and selecting them all. Go into Convert to Smart Objects. I always like to control everything as if it were a single photo. One thing I will mention though, all the composites that we've been working on in these live sessions have been fairly simple, just tops 10 layers. If you're working with a composite that's got hundreds or thousands of layers, this last step probably wouldn't be a good idea, just because you're going to be adding a huge file size to create that smart object, and may slow down your computer. So the alternative would be, and I'll do it in this example. The alternative would be to put everything into a group, and then press Control-Alt-Shift-E, which makes a copy of all the layers, and it merges them and puts them in a new layer. So the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E on the Mac, or you can just smash your forehead up against the keyboard and you
and
hopefully it works, because you have to seriously use all these
claw
to get all those fingers. But anyway, so
we're gonna do a chat and win.
Okay, let's do
Ready for it?
Yeah.
All right. So if you're new to this, we're gonna be gone for a minute. Please chat. Let us know your favorite superhero. And one lucky winner is going to win some free stickers, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So chat it up. Welcome back, everybody. We've got a bunch of, I see Deadpool, Spider-Man, Batman.
Aquaman.
Yeah.
Morph. Oh, that's a
Who's
good
your
one.
favorite? Oh, I know your favorite superhero.
Which is?
Well, you mentioned it
Yeah, I
yesterday,
did.
right? Spider-Man.
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Yeah. Wow, somebody mentioned Morph. That's a good one from X-Men. I'm
Nice.
assuming that's who he's referring to.
Yeah, I think so. So while we're generating a random winner from this chat and win, I'd like to talk about the prize. We teamed up with Sticker Mule, and the winner of this chat and win is going to win 100 free stickers from stickermule.com. They're 3-inch by 3-inch stickers, which is a pretty good size. And with 100 of them, I have a feeling you could cover plenty of surfaces. Maybe a couple. Maybe Jesus needs a few on his, so you can
send me some stickers, please.
Hey, check out who won. Right there in the middle
Oh,
of the screen.
awesome. Claudia.
Claudia.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
She submitted a thing yesterday.
Yeah, she submitted to the daily challenge yesterday.
Yeah.
She's joined us in chat.
All
so
right.
everybody congratulate Claudia?
Claudia, yeah.
Claudia, yes. And if you didn't win, never fear. If you visit this URL up here, stickermule.com/Adobe Live 19, we've got a special deal for you. You can get 10 stickers for $1. So, 10 stickers, that'll still cover.
This is gonna be this is Claudia's day because she's a friend of mine and she's actually in the render there in the dimension render.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
the project you showed earlier.
She wrote one of the books that's on the shelf.
Yep.
Yeah.
So check out her Behance page too.
Yeah.
I know she's in chat. Maybe her name will come up.
Yeah.
All right, so congratulations. Just before we did chat and win, you had kind of taken all the work that you had just done and kind of compressed it into a smart object. And were you going to do some final photo effects to it?
Yeah. And so I put everything into a smart object, but then I thought, that's what I've been doing for the last 2 days. Let me tell people what to do in cases where you have so many layers that putting everything into a smart object wouldn't be a smart idea because maybe your laptop wouldn't be able to handle a larger file with a smart object. So the alternative to that was to put everything into a group and then press Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E on the Mac. And that creates a merge copy layer of everything below, or everything visible rather.
So it's non-destructive in a way because you still have everything in a group beneath it, but this is a raster layer.
Yes.
Everything's just kind of merged together.
Exactly. And what I like to do, and you'll see why in a moment after that, is convert that layer into a smart object.
I see, yeah.
For 2 reasons. Number one is if I go into, what I'm going to do is go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and the adjustments you've been watching me do these last few days, I usually use the highlights and shadows just to, tone the image and give it a different feel. Maybe I want to make it brighter. I think I'll go brighter in this case. Maybe increase the clarity, contrast in the midtones. Sometimes adding the haze can make the image pop a bit, so maybe I'll do that. Vibrance, a smart way of saturating. It protects saturated pixels and skin tones, which we have a lot in this case.
Yep.
And maybe I want a lot of detail because I just really want his shirt to pop. I really want those particles to pop. A trick that I used in the previous stream was holding Alt Option in the Mac and the masking slider so that you can see what you're targeting when masking is set to 0. The mask is at 100%, so it's white. And if you start dragging the slider, Photoshop finds the edges and it makes them white. Everything else is black, so black conceals the effect. So maybe something like that.
Yeah, because you wouldn't necessarily want to sharpen the background because the background with the depth of focus effect is blurred anyway. So it keeps the mask, it keeps the sharpening effect mostly to the harder edges in the figure itself.
Yep, exactly. And you can go into the effects tab, and I'll zoom in so that you can see. So I applied the background originally was not blurry. But when you blur things in Photoshop, you just blur any grain. So I always like adding just a tiny little bit of grain to images just to make them a little more cohesive. And actually, next time you go to the movies, look at movie posters. A lot of times, if you really look there, you'll see a lot of grain.
Yeah.
And that's where I got the idea. I saw a lot of movie posters do it, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Well, likely movie posters when some of the most amount of compositing has been done.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Especially superhero movies.
Of course. And I'll just add a little bit of vignette and press OK. And the reason I converted it into a smart object is because I can come back and edit that camera raw filter if I need to. Maybe I decide that the image, needs to be a little warmer perhaps. I can make that adjustment and then press OK. and it updates. The second reason I made it into a smart object is because maybe I show this to my boss, my art director, my client, or I decide that, you know what, I want to make a change. I can disable this layer, open up the group again, and I'll just move all three layers, to the left, right there. Maybe I want them there instead. What I can do at that point is press Control Alt Shift E. There's my layer, and I can double click on the smart object. It opens up in a new layer, and I can simply drag this new layer that I created into that tab, and then I can close it and save it, and then all those effects are now applied to that layer.
Could you also, you did the Command E, you copied the merged layers.
Yes.
Could you just convert that to a smart object and then drag the smart object effects
You
down
can.
to it in the same file?
Yes, you can. So So the question is, can I convert that layer into a smart object and simply hold Alt Option in the Mac, click and drag the smart objects? Yeah, you can do that. Actually, that's faster. So we'll edit that part that I did it the longer way, and your way was faster. See?
Well, it's the cool thing about Photoshop.
Yeah.
There's always like 3 or 4 ways to achieve the same non-destructive result.
Right. And just in case you missed it, what I did there is I held Alt, clicked on this icon, and dragged it down to this layer, and it copies all those effects.
Cool.
Yep. And that's the final effect. Obviously, you would need to spend a lot more time fine-tuning it, but I'll zoom in, and you'll see while talking and doing contests and things like that, we got this really, really cool effect very quickly, and you can see the texture of the shirt. And we did it all by using an Adobe stock image and just converting that into a brush.
Yeah, super cool, super creative technique to use stock images as brushes. Before we get into the next section, it's a good reminder for people who are just joining us. First of all, we've got Jesús Ramirez here, Photoshop expert. I keep calling you that. I hope that's okay. I think everybody in chat.
I prefer master.
Master.
No,
yeah.
just kidding.
People
No.
have called you the master. But I think everybody in chat will agree there's already been a ton of tips. Today we're focusing on Photoshop, focusing on compositing, specifically using 3D images to help create composites. And while we're doing all this, it's a good time to get your portfolio together, or if you already have a Behance portfolio set up, go ahead and submit it to us, because in 50 minutes, 50 minutes, we're going to take a look at those on stream, and it's a good way to get feedback. There's a little deadline timer down at the bottom, so as long as you get it in before that, we'll select 2 random portfolios to look at on air. And I know we've got a ton more to cover, so we'll dive into it. If you have any questions about what you see, let us know, and we'll try to answer some live on air.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to the next thing.
How about Photoshop Overlord, Ricardo says. A little dark.
Yeah.
But it does have that gravitas, though.
It does.
It has some weight.
I'll dress up like Chris Angel next time I show up.
There
Maybe
you
no
go.
shirt.
Yeah, and maybe you won't be sitting here when we start, and all of a sudden you'll appear. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I have a couple of other things to show you, but I think I'll leave those just in case we need more time later, because I really want to jump into the 3D stuff now, just to make sure that we have enough stuff. And I'll show you a saturation and perspective trick if we have time. But I definitely want to get into Photoshop 3D and Dimension. So I'm going to open up this file here, and we have a nice background. And actually, before we get into all this, I'm going to open up this file here, and I just want to quickly mention a couple terms that will help people understand what I'm talking about if they don't know 3D. First things first, in Photoshop, you do have minimum requirements for 3D. So you need at least 512 of video memory, and you cannot use it in a 32-bit operating system. So just letting you know. In 3D, we deal with 3 different axes, X, Y, and Z, because in a regular Photoshop image, we just deal with the Y and the X. We're looking at a pixel grid. Yep. With 3D, we get the Z axis, which gives us depth, and we're going to be able to rotate our 3D models and our scenes and do all kinds of cool things. So might hear me say, oh, move this to the, in the Z axis, or push it back or something like that. That just means the coordinates in 3D. We're going to be dealing with 3D meshes, which are basically the 3D objects. Polygons are the little vertices or points that connect to define the 3D model. And this is all recorded, obviously, so you can come back and check. If later on I say polygon, you don't know what it means, you can come back and reference this
Well, these
later.
diagrams are super helpful, though. I love how there's kind of the informational layers.
Yeah, thank you. So this is really important. Photoshop really has one way. There's actually more than one, but specifically there's one that most people use to create 3D models, and that's extrusions. And you can think of it as like a cookie dough cutter or something like that, where you would just push dough through out of a shape and extrude it. And that's basically what a 3D model is in Photoshop. You could also use depth maps and things like that to also create models, but generally speaking, you're going to be using extrusions.
Did you make that image on top?
I found it on Adobe Stock.
Wow. Okay, of course. It's like perfect metaphor for describing it. And the image is right there.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I didn't make it as I just typed in cookie dough cutter on Adobe Stock and that came up.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Nice.
Materials are basically what gives the 3D model the visual appearance. So, if you have a cube and you want to make it look like it's brick, you overlay a material that's basically a photo of bricks. Obviously, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. UV textures, I don't think we're going to talk too much about them, but it's just basically how the texture map is applied to the 3D model. You'll need the UV coordinates to figure out how something is going to wrap. So, for example, if my shirt were a 3D model and the material was the design and you wanted it here, you would need the right UV coordinates to place it in this location.
To orient it.
To tell it where to go.
I see.
Right. Ground plane is going to be really important when we're working with 3D. Much like when we're doing compositing in day one, we had to determine the ground plane to figure out where our model was going to stand and keep everything in perspective. The same thing is true with 3D, but it's actually a little bit easier because you can rotate any which way you want.
Yeah.
So you're not stuck with the photo and you really can't distort it. The camera, in other 3D applications, that might have a different meaning, but in Photoshop, it just simply means what the canvas is looking at. So when we're looking, you'll see that we're going to be able to move the camera around. That's just basically an imaginary camera, and we can rotate it to a different viewpoint. But in reality, it's what the canvas is looking at. So that's the easiest way to think about it in Photoshop, what the canvas is looking at. We have our scene. You can think of a scene as just a 3D layer. Simple as that.
Cool.
And rendering is just the process of creating the final image. Photoshop needs to calculate all your textures, lightings, and everything in the scene to make it realistic, because you're going to get a preview, but the preview is not going to be the way it's going to look at the very end. Photoshop needs to make all those calculations. And the time that it takes to do that depends on the scene, the power of your computer, video card, and all that good stuff. So those are the different things that you need to know when dealing with 3D in Photoshop. And you don't have to memorize them all. I just wanted to give people just a quick rundown so that when I say those words, they have some reference to them.
Yeah, and there's a lot, certainly. So if this is all sounding pretty new to you or you forget, you can watch this video on replay, maybe even take screenshots of some of the definitions.
Yeah, for sure.
All super helpful in the 3D workspace.
Yeah, or good old-fashioned note-taking.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pen and paper.
You're really good at that.
Take your notes.
I've seen Michael take so many notes. Not here, just in general, walking around the building.
Peeking around.
Yeah. All right, so let's start with a very basic project. So in Photoshop, as we saw in that cookie dough cutter example, we can extrude things into 3D space, right? And we can do that with text layers, pixel layers, whatever layer that has a shape, right? So, of course, I found this phone image on Adobe Stock, and I want to make a 3D phone, and place it on that table and make it seem as if that phone is sitting on there. So just to save a little bit of time, I've already created a mask. Notice that this is not a pixel-based mask. This is actually a vector mask. You can see that there. It's a vector that has points, and I can move those points if I want to. I'm not going to change it. Actually, I'll do it just so you can see. So I can change the vectors. Oops, keeps doing it. There you go. See? I can adjust how the mask works by moving those vectors around. And if you don't know how this is created, you can go watch in day one. I talked a little bit about what a vector mask is right in the beginning, so you can watch the replay. But anyway, so I have a mask and I have my phone. So now that I have this, I can go into the 3D menu and tell Photoshop to extrude the layer. So basically it's that same cookie dough cutter thing where we're gonna push the dough through into 3D space and extrude it. We're gonna give it depth. We're gonna make it thick. The way that you navigate around Photoshop is by moving the camera, and you can use these buttons here. But I'm already in the view that I want. So I don't wanna lose this view, because if I move my camera, I'm not really gonna be able to get back to the exact same point.
Right.
So before I do anything, I have to make sure that my camera is set. So I'm going to just collapse this because I don't need it. And I'm going to determine if my perspective is working, and I don't think it is. It's a little difficult to tell where the perspective is in this image because I don't have any converging lines, and there's no visual cue. So I'm just going to give it an educated guess and just assume that the horizon line where all the converging lines meet will be just a little higher than what we started with.
Yeah.
And
actually, while you're showing these, you want to like kind of lean away from me and then point it out, or I can kind of point it out here.
There you go.
These are the controls.
These are the three controls. Yeah. So I just clicked, and this is how I like to navigate the camera. Some people like to use the controls up here, but I like these. So I click and drag up to move the horizon line up above. And I have another example after this that'll give you a better indication of what I'm really doing here if you missed that first class. So there it is. And what I'm gonna do now is set my camera. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm in the 3D panel, go into my current view. This is the camera, the little icon of the camera. In the properties panel, I can save my camera. And I'll just call it final view. That means that I can just click and rotate this anywhere I want, but I can always come back into my final view. So that's why I'm doing that. And I know I'm like over the icons. So if I need to push it back, I can click and drag back, forward. I can move it up, down, wherever I want it. But I think that we were at a good spot, and there it is. So if you see me moving the camera, I'm using these icons here. So I'm gonna move back.
Cool.
So you just saw me move the camera. That's different than moving the model. You can think about it as yourself looking at something. You can move yourself and look at an object from different angles, or you can look at the object and then move the object around.
Right.
So if you want to move the object, you can click on it. Notice how it's selected here. It's called layer 1. I can double click on it and change the name just like you could on any other layer. And then you have these icons here. The tip allows you to move the object in that direction. Then you have this little arc that rotates the object. And then you have this little cube that scales the object. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make it skinnier, see that? And I can then rotate it back. And I know I have the material on both sides. So we'll say that the front is on the right and the back is on the left. So if I open up the phone here, notice that we have different materials. Front, extrusion, back. So the back one, we have the texture. That's the image.
Yep.
So I can just remove the texture. And actually, was it this one? Yeah, I think it was that one. I'll remove it in the back for both. Oops. Remove texture. There you go. There's nothing there. But if I rotate it, you'll see that it's still in the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the extrusion, which is the side here, the extrusion that we created. In the two back materials, I'm going to hold Shift, and I'll select 3. And I'm just going to make sure that they have no texture. So I'm just going to remove the texture, and I'm going to change the diffuse. The diffuse is the color. You can just think that as color.
So this is where you get to pick the color of your phone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So you can have a white phone. You can have a black phone, which I'll go with black.
Cool.
and I'll press OK. And now I can click on that model, rotate it this way, and then just push it here. And if I need to make the phone bigger, not just scale it up, like because if I make my phone taller, notice how I stretch the phone. I really don't want to do that. I want to make the entire phone, I want to scale basically the 3 axes at the same time. To do that, you can click on the cube and drag, that center cube, and drag. And actually, here's the trick for you guys. If you want to make those overlays, the little 3D scaling, rotating, moving overlay larger, you can click on the cube and hold shift and drag up, and the icons become larger.
Which
the handles.
Yeah, helpful, because on each of those axes, there's like kind of 3 different control points, and the difference between them sometimes is it's just a few pixels. Right?
Yeah. So if you want to make that larger, hold shift and click and drag on the cube. If you just drag on the cube without holding shift, you'll actually make the 3D model larger.
Which is what you wanted to do originally a little bit, right?
Yeah. So there you go. Now that I made my 3D model larger, I'm actually going into the ground plane, and I don't want that because because the ground plane catches shadows and reflections. So I want to make sure that my phone is actually on the ground plane. So to do that, I'm gonna go and select my phone, and I'm gonna go into the coordinates, and there's this button here called Move to Ground. And notice how it just went up just a little bit.
Yep.
So now it's sitting on the ground plane. And when I'm working in 3D, I usually like having my hands on my left hand. I'm right-handed, so I have my right hand either on my mouse or a tablet. But my left hand, I like having my fingers in between the V key for the Move tool and the M key for the Marquee tool, only because the 3D overlays only show up if you have the Move tool selected. And sometimes I just want to see what my scene is looking like without all those lines. You can select any other tool, it doesn't matter, you can select the brush tool. But to me, for whatever reason, M is what, just maybe because it's right below the Move tool, and that's what
and if you accidentally make a selection, if you accidentally use a brush tool, like click on it and then click something else, just complicate things.
Well, actually, another reason too is with the Marquee tool selected, you can click and drag on a part of the 3D model and click on this icon to get a preview render of that section. So you can see there how Photoshop is analyzing that section, doing those calculations. And I can see, oh yeah, that area is looking pretty good. And then if I'm happy with what I see, I can just press the escape key and the render goes away.
Very cool.
But anyway, so at this point, all you need to do is just start fine-tuning the 3D model just to place it in whatever position that you like. Also, you can adjust the infinite light. You can click on this here, infinite light, and you can click and drag, and you can see how that phone, the shadow, is interacting with the infinite light. See that? Really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So now we have our phone composited into that image. And of course, I can click and drag and create, or render rather. And if that's too harsh, you can change the lighting on the properties panel. When you have the infinite light selected, you can see that softness is set to 0, but if I increase the softness, that creates a softer shadow, which is probably better for this composite. And click on render, and that's already looking much, much better. Obviously, at this point, I would just need to either scale the phone or maybe even push it back a little, just because I think it's a little too big. Yeah, I think it might be just a little too big, so I'll make it smaller. And I'll move it into the ground plane again. There it is. And now I have like my little advertisement for a phone. And the cool thing is that you could select the phone, and you can right click and select duplicate objects, and it'll make a duplicate of that phone, and I can pull it out. So now I have 2 phones.
Nice.
And maybe this phone is lying on its back on the table. But see, just by taking just a regular Adobe stock image, and you can type 90% here, actually, I'm sorry, 90 degrees, not percent. And then just move it to ground plane, and now we have a phone on the table. Right. So yeah, we took a very simple Adobe stock image, extruded it, and now we have this, like an advertisement for a phone or something like that. So very, very easy to do.
Yeah. We have a question: where to find the infinite light? Can you just get back to that
so you have to be in
surface?
so you have to have your 3D layer selected, and you have to be in the 3D panel, and the infinite light is here. if for whatever reason you deleted it or it's not showing up, you can create a new infinite light by clicking on this little light bulb and selecting new infinite light. But I do have one here, so I don't need to make another one.
Cool.
Yep. So just like that, you can have your phone. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention that actually was one of the reasons why I chose this table was that you can go into environment and you have reflections. See that reflections here? I can increase the opacity of the reflection. And that should show up on the ground plane. You see that right there?
Yeah.
And I could render it just to make sure that it looks okay. So now I'm getting the reflections of the phone, the table, and everything else. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get out of the way.
There you go.
Here.
You can see the reflections.
And we disappear completely.
And yeah, there we go. Yeah. And obviously the other phone that's laying on the table has a reflection as well. It's just not that noticeable because it's not as long. But yeah, just like that, you can create effects. And I keep getting that thing. I'm gonna have to explain that. So yeah, I was part of a pre-release for Microsoft, so they gave me this insider preview thing, and it expired. But then now I can't get rid of it, so I have to figure it out.
They're just reminding you.
Yeah.
Again.
I'm in the pre-release program for several things, including because I've done some work for Microsoft, obviously work for you guys. So I'm in the pre-release for several Adobe apps as well. But that's why that thing keeps popping up. But yeah, so at this point, what you need to do is then go into a layers panel, and then you can use regular adjustment layers, like the exposure adjustment layer to adjust the exposure of the image, or you could use maybe something like a selective color adjustment layer and maybe go into the neutrals and adjust the cyan to make it a little cooler, maybe just to apply a color grade.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything you like. But the important thing is that in this tutorial, I keep saying tutorial because that's what I'm used to saying when I do my videos. In this example is that you can easily extrude an image and make it look realistic really, really quickly in Photoshop.
Yeah. And so say you were done with this image, happy with the placement, composite, all your effects and everything. What would be your next step to get this basically, assuming this was for a digital output, you just want like a flat image, right?
Yeah, just a regular, you can do the same thing we did before, the Control-Alt-Shift-E if you want to just, continue working in a single layer. Or maybe you could just do like a file export and export it as a JPEG or something else. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right. Let me just close this, and we're gonna work with one more 3D object just because I wanna show you another way that you can use this technique and show you how to create some reflections, and that's gonna lead us on to dimensions. So you can kind of see how you can work with 3D in Photoshop, and then how you can use dimension, and you can see the advantages that dimension has over Photoshop.
Cool.
So I have this photo of a pier. And it's going to be no surprise, it's an Adobe stock image. And I simply typed in the words 3D, just a regular text layer. I can edit the text if I wanted to 2D or whatever, but we'll say 3D. So this could work with text or maybe your company logo, your personal logo, whatever it is. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into 3D, and select the layer first. New extrusion from selected layer, and it's going to extrude it. And this is what we didn't do last time, and I'll go back into the layers panel and disable this. So we talked a lot about perspective in day one and how important it is when you're compositing images together. In this case, we have a lot of converging lines that really tell us where the horizon line is. So there's two ways of thinking about it. You can think of where the ground plane is. So the ground plane here is the pier, obviously. And we can also see the sky. So where do they meet? Probably right about there.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, right? Or you can select something like the line tool and just follow all these converging lines and see where they meet. No surprise, they meet right where we assume that they would. So when I'm talking about finding perspective of a photo, that's what I mean. Where do the converging lines meet? Where's the horizon line? Or where the ground plane is and where the sky is. So like the ground plane is not necessarily where the ground is. In most cases it is, but if you were taking a photo of this table, then the table will be the ground plane, assuming that the object that we were trying to place on the table was sitting on the table.
Right.
So the ground plane of the object that you're gonna place on there.
Right.
So that's really what it means. But in most cases, it's the ground. So then we extruded that text into a 3D text layer. And now I need to click on the Move tool, and we need to make sure that the ground plane of the 3D text matches the one in Photoshop. Now I'm doing this by hand. There's no automated way of doing this, but Dimension does this for you automatically, and we'll see that later. But this line here, this gray line at the very end of the ground plane, that's the horizon line. So I can click and drag and try to match the horizon line to that guide, and I can get it close enough. If I can't get it quite there, I can go into the coordinates panel, and then I could just use the coordinates to try to get that that ground plane there. But what I'll do here also, I'll try to do it by hand, and I'll just bring it down. I think the computer is actually going a little slow, but that's okay. There we go. We're right on it. And when you get the ground plane on there, now I'm going to scale the 3D model, move it to the ground, sitting there. So now it looks like if it's really in that PRC, I can push it back, I can push it forward, I can move it anywhere I want. And I can just rotate it. And that's the importance about getting the horizon line right, because when you start interacting in 3D space, it really looks like if it's sitting there. Because if it wasn't in perspective, then it wouldn't look like if it's going back and forth in the on the pier. So I'm just gonna place that right about here. Maybe move it a little bit, and we'll just say that that's good. Actually, I'll make it bigger just so that the reflections are more noticeable. Oops, I keep selecting the wrong thing. I wanted to select this one. Yeah. And move to ground. That'll be good. I'm gonna double click on that 3D layer, and we have in Photoshop, when you select the 3D object like that, we have these presets. And you can click on the presets and see how they change the geometry of the 3D model.
Yep.
So I'm gonna use this one. I think this one's called inflate. Yeah, we're gonna use the one called inflate, and maybe don't make it as thick, maybe something like that. And the reason I'm making the inflate preset is so that we have some smooth edges that are gonna catch the reflection of the background. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because we're gonna, again, in Dimension, see how all this is gonna be automated. So I'm trying to give people show people that you can do it all manually in Photoshop, or you can let Dimension do that for you. Right. So with that 3D layer selected, I can just go into my materials. So I'll select my materials, select the top one, hold Shift, select the bottom material. The materials are inside of the 3D model, and just increase my reflections, right? And right now, the reflection are just these white lights. And those white lights are an image-based light found in the environment. You see it here, IBL, image-based light. And you can actually see the image right there. See that? See these little white dots?
Is that just kind of the default
that's
IBL
that's
in
the
Photoshop?
Default, in Photoshop, yes, that's the default. And you can just remove the texture, and you can create a new texture, and we can place whatever we want in there. And what we're gonna place is the background. So we have the background here, and I'm just gonna press Control-A, Command-A on the Mac to select all, copy merge, and I'm gonna go back into my 3D model, and I'm gonna go into Edit Texture, and I'm just gonna paste that in there. I'm gonna close it, save it, and now my image-based light, that photo became the image-based light, so the reflections of the 3D model are the background.
Right.
Which is really, really cool. And with the environment selected, you'll see this little sphere that we can click and drag, and we can rotate, so you can decide, you know, what the best angle for the model is. So you can, maybe we'll call that good. Actually, no, maybe just a little higher.
Is there any, I don't know, strategy for rotating it, or is it just kind of you're using your eye and
I'm using my eye.
experience
Yeah,
to say?
yeah. Because in the real world, obviously, it would be more like a 360 panel, and
Yeah.
that's what would be on there.
Yeah.
Like but not, in Photoshop you can only, if we only have the background rather, because in Photoshop you can actually do it, but if we only have just that one background, then that's all we have. We don't have the information around
Right.
it. And what I would do now is just click and drag on the 3D text and render it just to see how it's gonna look. It might be a little too bright, but that's okay.
And how many, this just does a number of passes over the image, right? And,
Mhm.
and kind of clarifies the result more and more each time until,
Yes.
A couple minutes later,
Yeah.
depending on the complexity of
Right,
the
exactly.
object.
And the reason that I am making these selections is because I don't want Photoshop to render the entire image. It just takes more time. So I may just want to see just a little piece. It'll be faster, and I
Yeah.
get an idea of what things are looking like. And since we already saw this, and I do want to get into dimension, I'm not going to adjust the light too much, but obviously the next step would be to go into the infinite light and make the infinite light match, the lighting in the scene. And obviously I would have to, smooth the shadows and things like that. So we'll render it just for a few seconds, and then I'll show you what I would do next in something like this.
Cool. And Ricardo's asking if shouldn't you use whatever would be on the opposite side of the camera, which obviously realistically would be true.
Yeah.
But using the background image itself is, a good enough stand-in
Yeah.
because whatever's lighting from behind the camera is kind of
Right.
all that information is in the scene you're looking at as well.
Yeah, exactly. And also, we don't know what's behind us.
Right.
It could have been a
exactly.
wall.
If you had that information, it
Right.
would be, the
Yeah,
most, most
exactly.
realistic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at least you get the purples, you get the general lighting sense, and then you can adjust things later.
Yeah. Exactly. So I just did a quick render just so you guys get an idea of what that looks like. And what I would do next is actually go back into the things we did on day one. All those principles, you will use them over and over and over again, even in more complex things. Number one is you might remember that I created a black and white adjustment layer just to see the image in black and white. When you remove the color, things become more obvious, right? In this case, it's obvious that the 3D text is really, really bright. So I can create a new levels adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below. That means that the adjustment layer will only affect the 3D model. And basically what I'm looking at here is how, this is way too bright, right?
Yep.
So this is the white point. So how bright is the brightest pixel on this layer? So this is what this is controlling. So I just move it to the left so that the brightest pixel is not so bright and it's, as bright as maybe that bench or whatever it is. Obviously I'm not really thinking about the light because the light is overexposed and has no detail. So something like this, maybe increase the contrast a little bit better, trying to match the contrast of the 3D scene. So that's before and after. If I bring the color back, you'll see that that looks better. And actually I missed one step, which was only controlling the luminosity. So not adjusting anything else, just the luminosity. And obviously when you bring the color back, sometimes you may realize that you went just a little too far, and you can obviously continue fine-tuning it.
And that step, changing the blending mode to luminosity, you mentioned it yesterday. It's because the levels adjustment also affects the saturation of the color.
Yeah.
So even if you think you're adjusting the lighting, was that the case?
Yeah, and I'll show you what we're talking about. So I'm going to show it with curves because I think it's easier to it's easier to demonstrate it. But if I make an extreme adjustment, right? On my curves adjustment layer, I have the blending mode set to normal, and I'll zoom in so that's even more noticeable. Notice how much saturation I added to that image. But maybe I just wanted to change the luminance, the brightness of it.
Yep.
I can change the blending mode from normal down to luminosity and notice the difference. See that? And actually, just to show you guys a cool trick, if you go into Window, History, I can click on this little icon here, the snapshot, and it just makes a snapshot of what I have on screen now. See, snapshot 1, and I could rename it if I want to. So I'll call this, I guess, luminosity. And then I can change the blending mode back to normal, and I can create another screenshot, and I'll call this screenshot normal. So luminosity, normal. So look how much more saturation there is. And actually this is a great technique if you're doing a lot of photography and you're doing a lot of fine-tuning in photography. You may want to go in there and adjust luminosity. You may inadvertently add saturation in places you didn't want to.
Right.
So it's just a good habit to get into. If you're controlling luminosity, just change the blending mode to luminosity.
Yeah.
So before and after. And yeah, so that's why we changed the blending mode to luminosity on this levels adjustment layer. And we have our 3D model, and just like with everything else, you can spend hours and hours fine-tuning it, trying to, make it look as realistic as possible. But that's how you would get a reflection on a 3D object in Photoshop, and how you would match the perspective, simply finding the perspective of the photo, and then with the camera moving that line on the ground plane to match as closely as possible on the image.
Super cool. So now I imagine we're going to be doing some of these similar techniques, but in Dimension. Maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but we're going to see how easy it is to do it in Dimension, right?
Yeah, so we're going to move on to Dimension now.
Cool.
And how much time do we have?
We got 18 minutes.
All right.
So just, good reminder, in 18 minutes, we're going to take a look at portfolio submissions. So please submit yours if you haven't already, or maybe if you did earlier today, but you weren't selected, try again. We'll pick 2 random portfolios to take a look at. And now we're in Adobe Dimension CC. This is a different product now, different Adobe product.
It is a different Adobe product. It's you may have heard of Project Felix, which is the pre-release name. And Adobe Dimension has been around for a little over a year, right? About 14, 16 months, something like that?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then basically it allows you to composite images and 3D objects together with no prior 3D experience. Photoshop assumes that you have a little more 3D experience.
Right, it's a little complicated.
Dimension does not.
Yeah.
So that's the cool thing about it. So we have our scene. By the way, all I did was create a new file. So I went to File, New, and I created a new scene. The dimension, the size of the file, of the document is here, 1024 by 768. And if you want to change it, you can change it here in the Properties panel under the scene. But anyway. What I'm going to do now is first bring in a background, and all your assets are here. You see all these starter assets? You have a whole bunch of starter assets. These are all free, and you can narrow them down by models, materials, lights, and images. We're going to start with an image, and we're going to use the city backdrop. And notice that as soon as I bring that in, Dimension is asking me if I want to match the lighting and perspective and adjust the canvas to the size of the image, all automatically. So I don't have to manually figure out where the horizon lines are and then move the camera. Dimension will do it all for me. So when I press OK, notice how the ground plane, see the ground plane here?
It's all off.
Yeah. And it should bring it in a second. Maybe you should try again. Or is it still trying to figure it out?
Yeah, it looks like so.
Oh, there you go. I did it right after I pressed. But it's notice the ground plane moved those lines, and the lines on the ground plane are really close to the lines on the ground for those tiles. So that means that the camera is now in perspective. And also in Photoshop, remember when we copied that pier onto that image-based light?
Yep.
Dimension did that for us automatically here already.
Oh,
so
I see. You see it there in the environment light panel.
Right here, environment light, you can see it, it's right there. And what I can do now is start bringing in 3D models. So I have these 3D models that are for free, and you can just click and drag whichever one you want in there. And I'm trying to think of something. I'll just do the sphere since it's like the most, basic. And those same 3D controls that you saw in Photoshop, you'll see here, or you can use the tools here in the panels. Notice how they're in categories. See the little line there? These control the 3D object. These are selection tools for the materials, and these control the camera and ground plane. So I can click on the scale tool, hold shift, click and drag and scale it up. And we'll apply a material now. That's our 3D model. And you're not going to notice it so much with the sphere, but I could rotate it, and I can of course move it back and forth. And if I click on the materials, I can select any one of these materials to apply to that. One of the cool ones, obviously, is the metal one because you'll see the reflection of the city.
And suddenly we're in Chicago.
Exactly. And not only that, but like think about how much time we spent doing all this in Photoshop and how quickly we did it here in Dimension.
Drag and drop.
Drag and drop.
Yeah.
Drag and drop. And this is essentially what I did on that more complex project that you saw earlier. Basically doing that 1,000 times. But that's all it is knowing the basics and just building on top of them.
Yeah, how long did that project take you in general?
It was roughly 2 weeks, not including render time. Obviously, I would just render each angle at night.
Yeah.
But it took about 2 weeks.
Wow.
Because I spent a lot of time, fine tuning the textures of like the books and things like that to make sure they look as real as possible. And I was a little lazy. I like I said, I took photos with my phone. It'd probably been better if I would have scanned them. Better.
Yeah. Oh.
But it worked at
Oh
the
yeah,
end.
it looked great.
Anyway, so we have the texture or the material applied to the 3D model, and if we want to see what that render looks like, we can click on this icon here, and we get a nice little preview render. See that? And if we move the model or adjust it somehow, the render preview up here updates automatically, and it's going fairly quickly here. And if I click on this icon here to expand the preview, I can see what the render would look like. And it's looking very realistic really, really quickly. Notice one thing, I didn't have to worry about also matching the infinite light.
Right.
Dimension knows where that is, and you can see how the light is affecting the ground. It looks very realistic. You can see the highlight here where the light is. If for whatever reason you feel that Dimension didn't do that good of a job, or you want to just take control, you can rotate the environment light here. You can click and drag. That's the reflection. The sunlight right here. And you can just rotate that right down here. See that?
That's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to do, but just click and drag. That's all you need to do. So if you decide that, maybe I don't want a reflective surface, maybe I want, a wooden surface, you can do that as well. You can click on that icon to see what the render looks like. And again, super, super quickly, you are getting photorealistic results. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on a project that is going to use the background of an image that we composited on day one.
Cool.
Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. So File, New, and Don't Save. And we're going to go into... one thing I should mention before I forget. If you click on this plus icon and you go into Browse Adobe Stock, you might be thinking, I don't want to buy anything. I'll just use the free assets. But if you go... from Dimension, browse on Adobe Stock. At least right now, all these are free. See that? Free. So you can see I downloaded a whole bunch of them already myself. But you can get more free assets not in Dimension. And that's something that I just learned. And I'll give props to my friend Teresa Jackson, who's an Adobe Max speaker and has a course on Dimension on lynda.com. And she said, do you know about that library with free assets? And I said, no. Because I assumed that if you went to browse on Adobe Stock, it would take you to
the search page or something for paid.
But no, that takes you to a page where you can find a whole bunch of free assets.
Yeah, and I imagine that library is growing. I don't actually know that.
Right,
but,
I don't know either.
As more and more models get made, those might be swapped out with different free assets.
Exactly. So another thing that you can do, obviously, is click on the plus icon, import your content, and I'm going to place an image as a background. And let me go into my desktop, day 3. And I have that image that we worked on day 1. So that was a composite. If you missed day 1, you can go and watch the replay and you can see how we created that image. So then I'm going to match the environment light, the sunlight, and the camera perspective and press OK.
It's not a lot of sunlight, that's for sure.
And let me go into my libraries panel, because you can download things from Adobe Stock and then bring them into your libraries panel, of course, and then download them from there. So I have a whole bunch of really, really cool 3D assets. There are space assets, and I know somebody in the chat, we talked about this earlier. We're going to place the link to this page on Adobe Stock where you can get a whole bunch of free 3D assets that are all space related. Look at how cool these things are. Super cool.
It's amazing.
So if you want to create your 3D scenes or whatever you want to do in 3D, I would suggest going there now and just downloading them now that they're free. I don't know if they will always be free or just because just last month Adobe did a contest on the on NASA and using Dimension, and they created this library of free assets. I don't know if they're going to stay free.
Yeah.
So I would go in there
get
now.
Them while you can. Yeah. Thanks, Tim, for posting the link. Check the chat pod if you want to get a download link for all of these NASA assets, 3D models.
And all you really need is an Adobe ID. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't need to have a Creative Cloud account to have an Adobe ID, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So even if you're not a Creative Cloud member, you can go in there and get these assets, I believe. But anyway, so this is where where I found this asset here, this space car thing that we're gonna use for this composite. So I have that space car right here, and I can click and drag and drop it. And it's gonna take a second. It's gonna be a larger model, obviously.
And the idea is maybe like 150 years from now, Earth is uninhabitable. We've made a colony on some cold planet.
Yes.
We've rebuilt New York.
Yeah, of course.
We're still running.
Yeah.
But there's just different vehicles.
She's got to get
on
her
the road.
steps in somehow, So you bring that in, right? And you can just click on this. Look how huge it looks, right? So it's obviously way too big, but you can click on the scale and then hold Shift and click on any one of the handles by holding Shift. And you can bring...
For a second, it looked like one of those horse-drawn carriages with those like wheels, and then wait, nope.
Yep. You can bring that down. And notice that we have the reflections, the color. We don't have to worry about any of that.
Amazing, yeah.
And then you can click on the rotate tool, and I'll just rotate it and try to make it seem as if it's going down the road. And then move it. And maybe I can put it like right here. And maybe he's got a friend behind them, so I'm going to hold Alt, Option to the Mac, click and drag on that point. It duplicates that 3D model.
Cool. Keeps
and
all
there
the
it is.
perspective and everything.
And that's the cool thing about Dimension. It found the perspective for us, and I don't have to worry about it. All I had to do was just say, yeah, find it for me, and then I can just drag and drop things on there. So now that I drag and drop this on here, I can click on this render preview, and we'll just give it a minute to render and see what we've got. And you can see the shadows and everything is looking really, really cool, really fast.
Yeah.
If you wanted to edit anything, maybe change the texture or something. And actually, there's a very important thing that I didn't mention that I should mention now. Remember in Photoshop when I first came in, I asked that it would be wise to save the camera in case you wanted to rotate and see the objects. You also can do that in Dimension. And actually, that's even the latest release of Dimension, which came out for Macs, I believe. If you go into this camera bookmark icon, you can bookmark your camera. So you can click on the plus icon and you can just call it like final view or whatever. And the reason that you want to do that is because maybe you want to rotate and see your 3D model in in a different angle, just to check it out. And then you want to go back into that view, you can just click on that camera view and it snaps back into place.
So if you rotated to get much closer or something to a material or something on this object and made a change to that material, and then clicked to your camera bookmark, would that change to the object itself? Go back? You know what I'm asking?
No.
So if you say you wanted to change one, can you change any of these materials? Some property about it?
Yeah, so I can click on the magic wand tool and I can make selections on a material. So let's just select the, oops, I didn't click on it. We can select the door, for example. Let's see if it selects the door. Oh, there you go, it selected the door.
Yeah.
And then I can go back into my starter assets and just for fun, we'll give it like actually, so it's noticeable, I guess we could do the metal, right? Drop it in there. So then now we have, actually it's not that noticeable. Let's do something. We'll do the gelatin.
Great.
Oh, wow.
All
right,
cool.
so we made a gelatin.
But if you had moved the camera to get closer to that door, either to help you make the selection easier or to check out the material in focus, but you had already saved a camera view, would that material change go back with the camera?
No.
Or would it revert
Got
back
it.
to
yeah,
the
no,
image?
no question, because the material has not. Just think about it this way: you're just remembering.
Just the view.
You were just remembering where you were standing.
I see.
Right?
Perfect.
Yeah. So that's the
super cool,
analogy.
then.
I'm standing here. I'm looking at it this way. I make a change. I want to see the change from the other side, and I can walk back, and that wouldn't affect the change.
Nice.
But I kind of like that gelatin effect on that vehicle there. It looks really cool. Let's render it for a second. Obviously, but that's the great thing about Adobe Dimension, right? We brought in those 3D models, and then we can select all these different materials. We can make it beer if you want to, or denim. So there's a whole bunch of cool things that you could do.
The future is looking cool.
Yeah.
I'll say that. Gelatin trucks.
Yeah. Yep. Anyway, so when you're done making all your changes in Dimension, you would click on the render button, and you can select all these different settings. You want to select the current view or the one that you save or whatever it is. There's different qualities, low, medium, and high. Obviously, the higher the quality, the slower the render time is, and how you want to save it as. I recommend saving it as a 16-bit PSD, and then click on render. Rendering can take some time, so I actually have a file rendered already so that we can work with, so that I can show people what the Photoshop file actually looks like.
Yeah,
it has
I'm curious
yeah.
what layers, if any, and
Exactly.
what effects.
So I'm not going to save this, and I should have kept Photoshop open, but that's okay.
Cool, and we're only a couple minutes away from taking a look at some portfolio submissions. I think the NASA theme is on target because we're going to go to space to do that.
Yeah.
But we've got a couple minutes until we do
Does
that.
Dimension render faster than Photoshop? I believe that, as far as I know, the Dimension team is working really hard on render time, so I assume that it does.
Yeah.
So this is actually the final render of what you just saw, if it opens. There we go. So it's basically the same thing I had there, just not the gelatin. So this is what the rendered file looks like. So this took about 20 minutes, I think, on my computer at home. And you get all these layers. You get a background layer, which is, just white. So oftentimes you don't need that. You just get your background layer, and you get 2 3D layers. The difference between them is that they use noise reduction on one. You see how this one says reduce noise here? And not on the other. See that? So you can see the detail here on the panels better. So oftentimes, to be frank with you, I like the render image. I usually don't like the reduce noise because I find that you lose a lot of detail, but that's just...
But the idea is that you choose one or the other.
Right.
You don't need both.
Exactly.
Cool.
And I mean, I deleted it now, but you could have easily just disabled it and kept it. And this is what I really liked that Dimension does. It gives us this additional layers group. And when you open that up, you have 3 different layers. You have a layer that shows you the materials. So if you just wanted to select a specific material, in this case, this 3D object has had one giant material for everything. Oftentimes, 3D objects may have 1 or 2 or more materials. And if you wanted to select a specific material, just go with the wand tool and click on it, and it just selects that material. Or you can select the different objects. In this case, we had 2 objects. So I can click on the color. Notice that it didn't select the pink on the other side. I can just uncheck contiguous, click, and it just selects those pixels that make up that color. And now I can select that specific 3D model in Photoshop and maybe create a curves adjustment layer or something, and then just adjust that one on its own. Very, very easy to do. So I like that a lot. And actually that will be the next step, to come in here and just make sure that I have the right lighting, fine tune it even further. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to show one last thing. And this layer is super, super cool. It's the depth information. So we can make a depth map out of that. And to do so, with that depth information layer selected, I can go into the channels panel, duplicate any channel, doesn't matter which one, and I can call it depth map 3D or whatever you like. Really doesn't matter. And I can then use that same technique I showed you earlier, Control-Alt-Shift-E, to make a merge layer out of the 2. I can go into filter, blur, lens blur, which will help you blur the image. And obviously it's not going to work with her because she's not a 3D model. We would have to mask her out, but since we're running out of time, I'm just not going to. But you can create select a depth map. So I'll select it. And that basically allows you to select what's in focus. See, I clicked on that car. See how that car's in focus?
Amazing,
If I click the one in the front, Now that one's in focus, and not just the car, there's depth. So if I click on this center wheel here, notice that it's blurry here, blurry there as well, and obviously more blurry the further back you go. And to change the intensity of the blur, you can just change the radius. So now you can really, really start creating a lot of depth in your images by using that depth map that came in through Dimension. And with any blur, you're obviously going to get noise. So this, let me just zoom in. You're gonna get noise, and this filter actually has a noise slider, so you can add noise so that you don't make your blurs seem fake.
Yeah.
And obviously I would need to like place her here maybe, and then do a quick selection tool, select subject,
mask,
and mask her, and there she is.
Cool. Well, really amazing use of, and I like the round trip flow, you know, started in Photoshop, created an amazing surreal, almost surreal scene, brought it into Dimension to take it even further, and then bring it back to do your final photo
So we
edits.
started this with day one, and we ended with it now.
Super satisfying. Well, thank you for sharing. I know that people have had some questions, and maybe we can get to those. Right now, we're going to go take a short trip to space, so thematically related. And when we come back, we'll take a look at 2 portfolio submissions from everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Airlock is tight. We can breathe in here.
Yeah. Thank you guys for getting a large helmet for me.
We both said when we were traveling up to space that we have pretty large heads. So helmets had to fit. All right, welcome back. We are going to do some portfolio reviews. We have 2 really cool full portfolios to take a look at. And let's go ahead and start with Corey Weberling. I'll put this between us. One thing I like to say just right off the bat, that, you know, portfolio is obviously made up of a ton of individual projects of work, but really, you know, in a role like I'm at in Adobe, we're often reaching out to artists and creatives in the community, and we use Behance to look for new artists to work with. And it really starts with the homepage, I think. It's about the ease of finding the information if we want to contact you. Bios are always super helpful to get a sense of who you are. And then also this sort of like overall view of your portfolio is just as important as the depth of the work within any given project. And so right off the bat, I have to say that this is a pretty rich, detailed portfolio. There's a lot of work. It looks, you know, thematically related, like got a sort of maximalist style here. And so,
and I think you used the right word, style. Because it's not the same subjects per se, it's different themes and all that, but you can tell it's the same artist, and I think that's really, really cool. And I'm loving that banner graphic too. It just makes everything come together.
Super cool. Yeah, Behance has recently been doing a lot to kind of update the look and feel of projects. I think they're feeling a lot more immersive now, which is great. So I know that we'll dig into a couple projects, but let's kind of see if we can learn a little something here about Corey. By day, a communication specialist; by night, graphic designer, photoshopper, digital artist, photographer, and husband. Loves everything to do with image manipulation. Feel free to contact me, and a little bit about what you like to do in your free time. And I love this. I think it's always great to know a little bit about like the human behind some great work. Sometimes being enigmatic and mysterious is cool, but it's always refreshing to get a sense of the person behind it. And a member since 2011, which is really cool, because that's like old school Behance.
Yeah, is that pre-Adobe Behance?
Yeah, well, it might be. I joined in 2012, and I think Behance was really new.
Okay.
So it could be right around that time. Super cool. What projects stick out to you? Where do you want to go?
I don't know why, but I'm really liking the one on the far right there, just from...
Cool, apocalyptic vultures.
This is super cool. I mean, you can tell that a lot of the principles that we even spoke about here, he applied, and I think it just comes together really, really good. I like the depth of it. I like all the detail. I mean, just to mask some of those things out, just
yeah.
Technically, it's really solid.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I'd be most interested. Obviously, like the final work is the pinnacle. It's like I want to show this.
Yeah.
Again, and we said it earlier. Like I think it'd be really interesting to see where these sources came from. And that maybe is not everybody's style to do, but always really intriguing for me to see how this was made because clearly a lot of care and work went into it, and probably a lot of layers.
Yeah. No, there's some really good masking going on here for sure.
Yeah.
I like the detail of the birds way back in the background. Like those things are what I really enjoy. I like looking at, those little tiny things that they actually took that extra time to think about those small details.
Yeah, absolutely. It really kind of sells an image. So super cool work here. I want to make sure that everybody go ahead and take a minute to give a follow to Corey.
Yeah.
I see him in the chat. He's saying hi. So congratulations for making it on and super cool work. Let's see what else we can get into.
Which one sticks out to you?
I'm kind of feeling these bison.
Yeah. And it also seems like his style is like very cinematic so far.
Yeah,
I mean, we've seen two images.
wide. Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Like, I mean, you just almost have to you can't do it here. The zoom doesn't work, but you just want to get really, I almost didn't even notice the subject and the wolf in the center because I was looking, and I think that's a compliment, right?
Yeah.
There's you stay in this image for a while.
Yeah, and I think those are exactly the same birds that he probably used in the other image, but still pretty cool.
Yeah, got a library of elements.
Yeah.
And let's see, Pixabay and bot images, primal feel. So cool, awesome area to kind of talk about the work. I assume most of this or all of it was done in Photoshop, but you can let us know if that's not the case. Lots of textural elements.
Complementary colors, pretty good.
Yeah. More vultures. Let's stick with some of this recent work. Anything else?
We'll go with the latest one, see what his latest work is.
All right, yeah, let's check it out.
Oh, that one actually does have a video.
This is a process video? Oh, just kind of animated a little bit. That's very nice.
Read. I feel that at least the pieces we've seen so far have a story behind it. I'm not necessarily sure what it is, but I'm sure he does. There's something going on. Let's
see if it's written out. Again, another great thing maybe to consider including with your projects is what's either the concept or what was the opportunity that you had to create something like this, even if it was a personal project. I mean, there's something about inspiration, storytelling, and you can sort of couple that with the image itself to.
And I'll say it again, his masking is really good.
Cool. If you hear that from you, then that's the highest of compliments. All right, let's dive into maybe one or two more, and we can kind of flip through. Wow, look at this chasm in the earth.
Super cool.
Yeah.
And I like how he uses, there's always an element close to the camera. I like that a lot, and I actually try to do that on my stuff as well. I think it looks super cool.
Yeah, that depth provides some immediacy. You kind of feel like you're right there.
Yeah, it makes us feel like in this one in particular, like we're hiding behind something, kind of peeking our heads out, which is really cool.
Yeah, maybe hoping not to get sucked out.
Yeah.
Face the vicious goldfish. Cool, super rich stuff. Trapped in ice. Textured icy portrait.
I wonder if that's Corey.
Oh, the subject in the photo? Yeah, the king. Cool, Corey. Well, thank you very much for submitting. Oh, colors in here are great. I love.
Yeah, this is
I love when
super
these
cool.
colors are
Yeah.
opposed with each other, sort of like minty teal and red. But thank you for submitting, Corey. Definitely,
Really
everybody
good job.
give a follow and a congrats to Corey for this
Yeah.
fantastic portfolio. I know there's a ton more work that we could get into. But let's go ahead and switch over to our second portfolio of the day.
My Mario, friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
met him in Guadalajara. He's an excellent artist.
Nice. All right, so Mario.
So since he's a friend, I'll go tough on him.
Yeah. Well, I
Nah.
mean, the work looks like it
No, he's
stands
great.
up for sure.
Actually, if you scroll down, I'll show you an image that I think a lot of you will recognize. That one here.
Oh yeah.
That one was featured on Adobe for a really, really long time. It's one. It's probably, in my opinion, his most famous image. It made it into. I was in Sydney, Australia, doing a conference for Adobe, and that image was featured on like the main stage.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing. I remember I work on the team that we kind of decided to purchase this image, put it
Yeah.
on the YouTube page. It was
Yeah.
the YouTube header for a while. It was
Yeah.
the start of this campaign, Make It, or it was a new iteration of the Make It campaign.
Yep.
Really dreamlike.
Mhm.
Super cool. I didn't know
Yeah.
about Australia and everything. That's
yeah, no,
gotta
it was
look gorgeous,
yeah,
huge.
it was great. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, Mario does a lot of great work. Really talented, super nice guy.
There's so many that I want.
And actually,
like,
I don't know if he's watching now, but I'll apologize in public. He sent me a message and I haven't been able to reply, but I'll blame you, Michael, because I've been here for like the last couple
That's
of
true.
days.
We've been keeping him here,
Yeah.
keeping him busy.
Yeah, and that's his girlfriend, I believe. I met her as well. Super nice lady.
Katrina. Oh, here we go. Here's a
Yeah, he does.
breakdown.
Yeah. And actually, Mario's currently working on. He's clearly a very good compositor, so he's working on a lot of compositing plugins for Photoshop. Really, really cool stuff coming out from Mario. So I would suggest following him on Behance at the very least and keep up with his work.
Very cool. Yeah, I love in this process video how kind of subtle
Yeah.
some of the touches are that really sell it. And obviously starting with a really great creative image.
Yeah.
But then just little lighting adjustments, sort of flattening out the blacks in
Yeah.
that, giving them a sort of like a cool hue that contrasts with the red.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, and if you're here, Mario, like I would tell people, I will suggest for you to place your link on the Photoshop plugins he's working with right now. They're really cool.
Yeah, definitely share what you're working on lately.
Yeah, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, this one has a cool process video.
Oh, wow. We'll just kind of watch a little bit of this to see how it's made if everybody's interested. I'm interested. Speed art. I hope everybody's not getting too dizzy.
I know. See this, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, that's brilliant, the way he put the cannons on the, but he's kind of doing there what we talked about on day one, you know, matching the color, luminosity, and all that. So those little tiny principles that you saw on a simple composite like this one work on even the most amazing composites that
Yeah, absolutely.
you see.
It's the sum of many small parts. And once you get started on something like this, I mean, the task becomes pretty monumental. I mean, just look how many processes that he's got
Yeah.
to get through, but you knock them out and they're all small little things.
Small little
like
things,
adjust
yeah.
color here, refine an edge there, and suddenly you can create some really cinematic work.
Yep.
Yeah, Mario is here in chat.
Oh, hey, Mario.
Cool, and actually Corey's given some props saying that's
Nice.
one of the people got him into compositing. Super amazing. I'm sure there's some really cool music that goes along with this too right now.
Everybody's listening to it except us.
Right, exactly.
It's like,
It's just like dead silent in
to
here
us,
for us
yeah.
right now.
It's like some heavy metal or something on the
Yeah.
other end. Dodging and burning, nice. And see, like we were talking about this yesterday, I think, where like once you have enough experience, you're gonna look at something like this and you're like, oh, okay, he's doing this, he's doing that. So like we wouldn't necessarily need a step-by-step tutorial per se, but you can kind of see what he's doing. I remember watching this part and I was like, oh yeah, that was brilliant the way he took those cannons and just put them on top of that dinosaur, T-Rex or whatever it is, and made it look really, really good.
Yeah, this is some serious detail-oriented work right here. And creative thinking too, is like some of these elements came off of vehicles, you know, repurposing a wheel that spins a tank tread to become a pivot for the cannon is really
cool.
Creating armor. I hope everybody in chat is just kind of sitting here like we are, just like in awe.
Yeah.
Mouth open. Let's go ahead and zoom. Oh, we're so close to the end, we'll let it run. If anybody has any questions for Mario, since he's here in the chat, about where he gets his ideas, where to find more of his work, go ahead
and follow him on Behance, of course.
Definitely follow.
So that's one of the artists I follow on Behance, Mario, for sure.
And we assume that Mario, you know, like got up to eat meals during this and maybe like went to sleep or something.
Knowing Mario, he probably didn't sleep. Because I think one time he messaged me and it was late for me. I go to bed late, but I'm like, man, you're like 2 hours ahead of me. Like, how are you still awake?
Yeah. This is cool. It looks like we're getting into some of the final color touches.
Looks fantastic.
Yeah, really amazing work.
Yeah.
And incredible to share the process too. That's also a big, generous thing. I love this. I love anything that's sort of like dreamlike.
That's your thing.
Warm. We'll just come in here and watch one quick little process. But again, a good lesson too, starting with really creative basic image. And so much of this lighting and the scene itself was informed in that first photograph. Then it becomes a matter of kind of a bit of compositing, creative editing.
And as much as like Photoshop, it's really good if you can get everything on camera, because then things are already real.
Right.
So even in this scene, if obviously the flame was visible in the final scene, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he wanted the scissors or whatever it was to have the light source. He could have hid that flame behind her hand.
Yep.
Taken a photo, and you would still have that light on her. And even though you could probably do it in Photoshop and fake it, it obviously can look more real.
Absolutely.
Being an actual image.
Cool.
Yeah, making this like superhero dog type of thing.
I love it. For the 1 second that you see the dog photo, it's like, you know, kind of a normal family photo of a pet. Suddenly subverts that
and
whole...
he's using that same technique we showed today. Black layer set to multiply, or I'm sorry, screen.
Yeah.
Good job, Mario.
Super comprehensive portfolio. I think I've seen this before. Just photo work.
And also you can see how his art keeps getting better as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely. It's really becoming pretty rich and fantastic.
I think I met Mario right around the time he did not this Iron Man, but the other Iron Man.
Is it also in here?
Yeah, it's on the left there. Right there.
Oh, here. Yep. Live stream.
I know he does live streams for Adobe Light in America.
Super cool.
I mean, this could be a screenshot out of, the Avengers movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just pause the movie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very cool.
Right.
I mean, we've got 5 minutes left.
I got stuff,
I know
man.
you have stuff. Let's see a little bit more. Thank you everybody for submitting. We've got one more chance to review your portfolio. The stream following us, which will start in about 10 minutes. So if you didn't see yours yet today, try again, and there will be one more opportunity.
So this is a little known technique to see the saturation of an image. We've talked about how you can create a black and white adjustment layer to kind of remove the color and we can focus on luminosity. But what about when you have a composite and you have almost everything right, but it still doesn't look good? Sometimes the issue is that the background or the foreground has way more saturation than the other. And how can you see that? You can actually create a selective color adjustment layer. And if you go into each individual color and make sure that absolute is selected and set the black slider all the way to -100 on all the colors, like so, and then change the whites to +100 and the neutrals to +100 and the blacks to +100, you create what's known as a saturation map. So you can see saturation. Areas with more saturation are going to be brighter. Areas with very little saturation are going to be darker. So now I can create a hue saturation adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below. Watch what happens when I decrease the saturation. She gets darker.
Yep.
I increase the saturation, she gets brighter. See that? A lot of saturation, no saturation. So you can use this as a guide to kind of make the black and white background image look. If the black and white image looks good and it looks like it fits, then when you remove it, that will look much better.
Yeah.
Before and after.
Wow.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
So saturation map.
Super cool.
I think, how much time do we have? Because I think I may have
2 minutes.
Oh man, I should have started with the other one. That one might take me longer than 2 minutes.
That's okay, we'll get through it.
So this is a really cool perspective example. And actually, I think I saved over the file when I was practicing it. Yeah, because I do have to practice it to make sure it works. I don't want to come in here and show you guys things that don't work. So I'm just going to delete all these layers, right? So how can you place something into perspective? There's of course the vanishing point filter, which allows you to paste things into perspective, and it works great. But the downside is that it's destructive. You can't use it as a smart object. And maybe you're working on a campaign with signs or cell phones or screens, and you're working with different products or countries or whatever. You need to swap those out. You need to create a template that allows you to work non-destructively. So how can you place something into perspective and work non-destructively? A lot of things in Photoshop I've learned from people, and I try to credit them when I do. I think this is one of the few things that I'm like, this is 100% mine, because I've never seen anybody else do it. So I used to work as a production artist, and I needed to come up with a way of working in perspective non-destructively in Photoshop. And the way that I came up with was by using a tool that you probably wouldn't imagine that you would use for this example. And I'm going a little fast because I know we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to use the perspective crop. And I already have these guides that are letting me know where the corners of that sign is. So that's my perspective crop here. And I'm just going to click and drag these points and snap them there. And I'm going quickly right there. And when I hit, did I get this one on this side? No, I didn't. Right there. When I hit enter or return in the Mac, that sort of removes the perspective and makes it flat, right? So what I'm going to do now is go into edit, copy, select all, Control A, Command A in the Mac, edit, copy, merge, and then I'm going to undo. Oops. Undo. I don't even know what version of Photoshop I am, so the keyboard shortcuts are like. So then I'm going to go Control V, Command V to paste. And no, I didn't copy it. I'm sorry, guys. I'll do it again really quickly. I copied the other one. Those keyboard shortcuts really got me confused.
It's a speed round for you now.
It's a speed round now. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure I copy it by cutting it. And then I'm going to go into, just to make sure I do it right, into the history panel and go here right before the perspective crop, and then I'm going to paste. So now that it's pasted, I can convert that into a smart object. And then I'm going to press Control T, Command T to transform, distort, and I'm just gonna match those corners to those areas again. And it's not gonna be 100% perfect because I'm going fast. But we now have basically the original image back, right? Because the perspective now matches and it's the same. But the cool thing is that we used a smart object, so I can double click on this smart object and I can place whatever image I want in there, and it will be in perspective, and we will be able to edit it at any time. So if I bring in this photo, I can scale it up. It could be text, a logo, whatever, it really doesn't matter. Save it. There it is. Nice. And if I decide, you know what, now for a different campaign, I'm gonna use a different photo. So maybe I'll select this beach photo. So we had a summer campaign and a winter campaign. Save it. So that's how you would composite something into perspective non-destructively in Photoshop. So the key is use the crop tool to remove the perspective, get the right aspect ratio, and bring it back. And I know some people will say things like, well, can't you just, just transform it and match the corners? And yeah, you could definitely do that, but then it's a different aspect ratio, right? So it's gonna look stretched and it's not gonna look realistic.
Yeah, super cool.
All right.
Well, that's a ton of tips. If you're just joined us live today only, just a reminder, we were here for the past 2 days, so there's 3 sessions with Jesus in total. Please check the replays. There's a ton of nuggets of information in there about Photoshop. We're out. This is the last stream for us this week. I know you'll be back. I'll be back.
We'll be back.
And Shauna Lynn and Paul Traney are going to join us in about 5 minutes. So stick around. Thank you, everybody, and take care. Bye.